who they are. They put them on top of the white book. They're City Center Complex exhibits number 32 or 33.
I think 32 are in it, just 33.
33 is now entered into evidence. All right, Mr. Beaton, you want to proceed with your cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Keller.
Good afternoon.
You're here today, obviously, as Mr. Keller here, but you're also here as the designated representative of the bank. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you recall back in 2009, I took your deposition.
Correct.
And in fact, I didn't ask for you specifically. I asked for someone to speak on behalf of the bank as to the city center issue.
Yes.
And the bank made the decision that you would be the one that would speak on its behalf.
Yes.
Now, you weren't actually involved day-to-day in the city center back in 2005 and 2006, were you?
No, I was not.
Mr. Speck was involved day-to-day at first.
Correct.
And he reported to Mr. Yamtich.
Yes.
And then Ms. Steger took over day-to-day.
Yes.
And she reported to Mr. Yamtich.
Correct.
But by the time we got to depositions, Mr. Speck had left the bank.
Correct.
Ms. Steger had left the bank.
Correct.
And Mr. Yamtich had retired.
Correct.
So that it fell to you to speak on behalf of the bank.
Yes.
And to do that, you had to go back and review a bunch of documents and familiarize yourself with things so you could be the voice of the bank.
Yes.
Now, there's a few things that you discussed that I wanted to clarify before we move on. Remember, Mr. Woodward showed you that December 2005 letter regarding residential at City Center. So you got it in summer of August, or summer of 2006?
Yes.
There were actually previous letters from the city too, weren't there?
I know we've seen a few letters from the city over the last week.
Could you turn to tab 34 in the red book? What's the date of that one?
That is November 9th, 2004.
And that's from the bank's file too, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And you see the number in the bottom right?
34, yes. Or 542.
Yeah. And did that tell the bank that this was office, retail, and residential development?
Yes, it appears as if it was preliminary approval for office, retail, and residential.
Okay. And then I apologize for the jury again for having to switch books. There's tab 33 in the white book, which we just added. We can put it up on the screen too. That letter is also from the bank's file, isn't it? It's admitted as City Center exhibit, but you tell from the number in the bottom it's from the bank's file.
I'm not sure what the codes mean, but if you say it's from the bank's file, I'll believe it's from the bank's file.
And what's the date of that letter?
September 2004.
And does that also tell the bank that there's a special use zone for residential units?
Special use, construct 48 condominium units, and none of the buildings we're financing them. I take that back. In building 6, it says residential units.
And that's something that you had from before the loan originated?
No.
Well, September 28, 2004.
It's dated before the loan originated.
And we heard Mr. Speck testify that got all the permits and looked at all the approvals before he approved the loan.
I can tell you it's in the bank's file. I cannot tell you when the bank received it. I know as of the summer of '06, we were reaching out and making efforts to figure out what the zoning was because we were confused.
And again, you're making these determinations, looking back at it based upon the records in the file. You weren't involved back in '05 when it was approved.
Correct.
Mr. Speck was.
Correct.
And you're not telling the jury that Mr. Speck was wrong when he said he got these permits and zoning approvals before he approved the loan, right?
Mr. Speck said he reviewed permits and zoning approvals. I don't know that he said he reviewed this letter.
Well, this is part of the zoning approval, isn't it?
This is a letter from the town referencing a special use permit, or a special use B3 zoning for the project.
And it was after a hearing, and the city attorney knew, the mayor knew.
I can't tell you Mr. Speck knew, though.
So there are documents in your file before the loan originated that demonstrate this was going to be mixed use, commercial, retail, and residential.
I object. This states the evidence.
Well,
He testified that these documents were not in the bank's file.
I think he testified he didn't know.
Testified that he told me they were part of the file, he agreed that they were part of the file.
The question is whether they were part of the file before the closing. He testified they were not.
Well, sir, didn't you just tell me you don't know when these were put in the bank's file?
I do not know when they entered the bank's file.
Now, as I understand your argument here this week, and you being the bank, it's your position that the construction loan agreement prohibits any residential use for the part you're financing.
Correct.
Could you turn to tab 4, please?
In the black book.
In the joint fund, the black. That's the construction loan agreement again.
Okay. Yes.
Now, do you have that document in front of you?
I do.
And you've reviewed paragraphs 1.3E and paragraphs 1.3F several times for the jury, haven't you?
E, yes. F, I don't know if we talked about.
That's the leasing requirements.
Correct.
And you said that requires retail and office.
Correct.
And it requires 50% to be retail and office.
It requires 50% of the building to be pre-leased before construction starts, and 25% of that needs to be office.
Could you point out to the jury what sentence in 1.3E prohibits residential use?
I can't point to a sentence that talks about residential use.
There's nothing in there about residential use, is there?
Nothing. Correct.
So if you have a building that has 50% retail and commercial, the other 50% could be residential, couldn't it?
No, that's not what that paragraph is saying.
All right, let me give you a hypothetical. You have a building that's 50% residential, 50% retail and office, of which 25% is office. How does that violate paragraph 1.3E? What sentence does that violate?
Of that particular sentence, I don't think that it does, aside from 50% of the building is not leased, and there's no residential in this project.
Well, that's my question. What about that paragraph? That's what you've been referencing all week.
Mm-hmm.
What about that paragraph says no residential?
The fact that it doesn't say residential is allowed.
Where does it say that?
Where it talks about the allowed uses in this document, being office and retail.
Can you point me to that paragraph?
point me to the paragraph you want me to read about residential?
Well, you reviewed for the jury, or we've had reviewed for the jury earlier in the week the definition of retail lease, the definition of office lease, and this paragraph that says 50% has to be retail and office. Would you agree with me that there's nothing about paragraph 1.3E that says residential is prohibited?
It does not say residential is prohibited. It does not talk about residential at all.
Would you agree with me that there's nothing about paragraph 1.3F that says residential is prohibited?
No. F says prior to construction of any building, borrower shall have at least 75% of all completed buildings leased.
And those are the paragraphs that you said you discussed with Mr. Plank. Somebody discussed with Mr. Plank.
Correct. Somebody discussed with Mr. Plank the leasing requirements for the building.
Now, if you were to include the retail or the residential leases, you'd be well over the 50% leasing requirement, wouldn't you?
If I were to allow what?
If you were to include the residential leases in your calculation there, that would be well over the 50%, wouldn't it?
No, I don't have any residential leases.
Well, we can go through them again, but you've seen the lease from Mr. Santa Catarina, the lease from Rich Plank, the lease from Rachel Plank. Those are all in your file.
Yes, those are all in the file.
If you included those leases, you'd be well over the 50%, wouldn't you? You've already got 50% there.
I don't recall, I don't think any of those leases were signed before that building started construction.
No, they were after, but before the bank stopped paying, weren't they?
I don't recall. I think you're correct, but I don't know exactly when those leases were signed.
And there was also office space that was spoken for in Building 2, wasn't there?
At some point in time, there were office spaces leased in that first building.
Could you turn to tab 72 of the red binder? That's a letter regarding sign approval for strategic financial solutions.
It is a letter from City Center. I don't know who it's to. It's talking about strategic financial solutions. Dear Wayne, please accept this letter of approval for the signed drawings submitted for your office space on building number 2, outside facing north, and 1 facing east on second level height.
So there is office space that's going in upstairs in Building 2.
It sounds like Mrs. Plank, I think, is approving strategic financial solutions drawings. I think that's what it says.
For their office.
For office space.
In fact, Raymond James, which is strategic financial, did move into office space in Building 2, didn't it?
I believe they did.
And let me show you what's been marked as City Center Exhibit 20. Have you seen that before?
I may have.
And in fact, doesn't that tell you, can you review the date of that?
I'm gonna, if Your Honor, can we approach, please?
Yes.